Joining me now is author of such best-selling titles as The War on the West and The Madness of Crowds, the associate editor of The Spectator, Douglas Murray. Douglas, let's start with the Biden family, and I tell you, this story stinks of the swamp. The New York Post is reporting that Joe Biden's presidential campaign prompted former acting CIA Director Mike Morell to help Biden by organising 50 colleagues to sign a letter in October 2020, just before the election, falsely claiming that damning emails from Hunter Biden's laptop published in the New York Post were Russian disinformation. In private sworn testimony, Mike Morell told the House Judiciary Committee that Anthony Blinken, now Secretary of State, was the senior campaign official who reached out to him shortly after the New York Post first published its bombshell revelations. The fallout from the laptop from hell, as it's been called, Douglas, continues.
Yes, I mean, in a way, this isn't surprising. All that's happened is, that we have been told how this particular conspiracy occurred. I say conspiracy, and I don't say it like we know that the 50 former intelligence officers who signed that letter in 2020 ahead of the election saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was classic Russian misinformation must have been coordinated. I mean, they didn't all just come out of a time and say, I'd like to look at the details of this laptop.
It was organic. It was organic, Douglas. Exactly. They just all saw Russian disinformation and got together. I mean, but this is, you were called a conspiracy theorist if you suggested that when it mattered just before the election. I mean, this is, the timing of this little conspiracy is what's crucial here, because we had an election literally within weeks, and we had this effort, this disinformation effort to confuse the American public. And it was one that the bulk of the media, as well as social media outlets, supported, as well as those intelligence officials.
That's right. I mean, as you say, Rita, I mean, we both covered the election in question. You know, it was incredibly tight in America, as we both saw in battleground states. And so when the laptop from hell landed, there was all the talk about, the dick pics and all this sort of scandal. I didn't care about that. What I cared about was the stories about Biden family profiteering off the big guy, as he's described in some of the emails. So that was the real story. And then, of course, the New York Post broke it. And then among the reasons why other media didn't follow up, and why Facebook and Twitter and others suspended America's oldest newspaper, was former intelligence officials saying, we think this is all Russian disinformation. They can't have seen the information in question. They can't have done. So we've known all along, clearly there was some coordinated effort to make sure that this story was just trashed from as high a source as possible with as many signatories. Now we know how that happened. I have to say, Rita, I don't hold that much hope for this, but I think the American public and the wider public are owed an apology, because this was not disinformation from the Russians. It was disinformation from former senior intelligence officials in America, and that is not their job. Their job is not to do this. And there's one reason why in particular, as I don't need to tell you, which is the distrust that this helped to sow about the intelligence community in America as a whole is incalculable. These 50 former spooks have done incalculable damage to at least half the country's view of them by doing this intervention, which was purely political.
Absolutely. That is beautifully said. Douglas, you've written in the National Review about sensitivity readers, a term we weren't even familiar with a few years ago. And we've got this trend of them retroactively editing works of dead authors. And we're talking here about some great authors like Ian Fleming and Agatha Christie. Where is the demand for these sensitivity readers coming from? And what do you see as the impact of the work they're doing?
It's an amazing story, this, Rita. Sensitivity readers are something that people who are living and write have had to start to put up with in recent years. I'm particularly disdainful of this myself. I think that if a publisher said to me, we're going to sensitivity read your book, I would say, well, you can waste the money if you want, but I like to think that my readers are grown up and can cope with life, as we used to call it. But, they think that actually books are sort of scary things, that we've got to be protected from them. And in a way, of course, they're right. By the way, as I say in this piece, sensitivity readers are now going retroactively through the Western canon. Agatha Christie did quite well, actually. She sold more books than anyone apart from God. But these new sensitivity readers are going through her back catalogue and saying, oh, we found terms that we don't use anymore, and so on. They found that Ian Fleming's original Bond novels, by the way, one of the good things about the Bond novels that are even better than the films in some ways, is that Bond is really quite an unpleasant character. He's a bit of a misogynist. He's not just the occasional drinker. He's a bit of a heavy drinker. Well, good. I like my heroes flawed as well. These people think we can't cope with that, Rita. They think we have to be protected from that. And so they are erasing Roald Dahl's words, Ian Fleming's words, Agatha Christie's words, and others. And I say, apart from anything else, this is a fundamental assault on literature. And I just wanted to quickly read you something, Rita, which I quote in the piece. A letter of Franz Kafka, the famous author of Metamorphosis, among other works. In 1904, Kafka wrote to a friend of his, he said, I think we ought to read only the kinds of books that wound and stab us. A book must be the axe for the throat of the sea inside us. What a beautiful sentiment. Of course, a sensitivity reader today would say, oh dear, that sounds very dangerous and possibly triggering. We can't have that. Well, I'm on the side of Kafka, not of the sensitivity readers.
And Douglas, don't tell me they're going to come for Picasso. I mean, surely the cancel culture mob can't have the great Picasso in their sights.
Yes, I mentioned this in a piece in The Spectator this week. If a friend of mine in the art world said to me some time ago, watch out, they're going to come for Picasso. I said, look, I'm not the greatest fan of Picasso. I'm a fan of the early period. The late period, I think it becomes a bit of a factory of money-making, if you like. But nevertheless, he's one of there's no debate about it. He changed art forever. Of course, once again, he had attitudes towards women that people don't hold today. One of my best friends who died many years ago remembers being at a dinner with Picasso in Moscow in the 50s, where Picasso stripped off to his trousers and announced to everyone very drunk that he wanted to leave a baby in Moscow. Of course... These days, that would be regarded as appalling. Well, I say, I find that quite funny myself. These days, it's like, that's enough to get you cancelled. Well, I'm sorry, but I expect geniuses to be flawed. I do. I really do. And I don't want... I give lists of examples in the piece of various banal things that are being done to try to assault Picasso in this anniversary year, 50th anniversary of his death. One of them, by the way, is an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum of Art called Pablo-matic, which is, just apart from anything else, so incredibly leaden as a joke, where 100 female artists, mainly, of course, of color, probably indigenous, have been invited to attack Picasso through the form of art and problematize him. What are you to say? We live in an era where geniuses are always being brought down, and the most banal and talentless figures in our era are forever being raised up.